Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aaliyah Pollock, and I'm an AI data and technology analyst at RICS. For those of you who may not be familiar, RICS stands for the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, and we are a leading global professional body that sets standards for land, real estate, and construction sectors. With over 110,000 members, we work to advance knowledge, uphold ethical practices, and drive excellence across more than 140 countries globally. In this role, I am responsible for analysing the impacts of data and technology across the built and natural environments. And as part of this, I coordinate the RICS Tech Partner Programme, a collaborative platform for professionals working with innovative data and technology. Our goal is to educate the industry by producing thought leadership content for the surveying profession so that we can bridge this gap between surveying professionals and technology innovators, ensuring that new solutions are effectively integrated into our workflows. We also help to contribute to achieving sustainability goals across all asset types. A key aspect of our commitment to sustainability at RICS is our whole life carbon assessment standard, which is a framework for measuring and managing whole life carbon emissions in the built environment. This standard aims to enable accurate and consistent carbon measurement, addressing embodied, operational, and user carbon. It provides a structured approach for managing carbon budgets and supports the delivery of a net zero future. Today's discussion will explore how AI and technology can play a crucial role in advancing these sustainability objectives, including the application of whole life carbon principles. We'll explore how these innovations can help us manage carbon emissions, ultimately contributing to a more sustainable built environment. Now, I'm excited to get this panel discussion started, so let's hear from our panelists. So, Tariq, you're first on my screen, so I'll start with you.
Perfect. Thanks, Aaliyah. So my name is Tariq. I'm the founder and CEO of Metabuild. Metabuild is a Berlin-based company that has been around since 6 years, helping real estate developers, helping existing building portfolio owners optimize their buildings, create better buildings with a very strong focus on sustainability and cost effectiveness. We've been applying this technology that we've developed in more than 6 million square meters gross floor area until now. And we've been working with major clients like Daimler Real Estate, Aachener Grund, Landmark, and a lot of German companies, but we're on track in terms of internationalization right now. Very happy to join this panel. Thanks, Aaliyah.
Thank you, Tariq. Katie, I'll move across to you.
Yeah, thank you. Great to be a part of the discussion today. So a big thank you for having me on board. Katie Whipp, Global Head of Partnerships at REsustain. REsustain is a young but scaling property technology company addressing the decarbonisation of commercial real estate. We have a specific focus on transitioning the 80% of buildings that will still be standing strong in 2050 via the application of our digital twin technology. So in a nutshell, what we do with our clients is we support them in accessing and sustaining early wins through the remote optimization of existing building controls. We look to see energy savings in the region of 24 to 60% within the year. And then we also extend the application of our technology to support the full transition of the building or portfolio in line with net zero targets.
Thank you, Katie. Jada?
Thanks, Aaliyah. Great to be here. I am the co-founder and CTO at Xylo Systems. And what Xylo Systems does is biodiversity intelligence to help any organization, but primarily we focus on property development and asset management to understand the state of biodiversity on their assets. So we aggregate a whole range of different biodiversity data sets together to help organizations report to frameworks like the Task Force for Nature-related Financial Disclosures, but also focusing on the UK biodiversity net gain legislation and a whole range of other frameworks that are coming down the line. In addition to that, users can also use the platform to due diligence planning for their sites, as well as design and planning of assets to make sure that biodiversity is at the heart of those designs, both from a risk perspective, but also for optimization of nature into the future.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Ed.
Thanks, Aaliyah. Yeah, hi everyone. Absolute pleasure to be on the panel today. My name's Edd Ashworth. I'm account director for a company called Perse Technologies, responsible for business development. But Perse itself is an energy and carbon data infrastructure provider. So our USP or unique selling point, I guess, is that we have access to every electricity and gas meter in the UK. And what our customers do with that is they either integrate it into their current systems or use third-party systems such as carbon management or ESG platforms from myriad of use cases. But the way we kind of describe it is we describe ourselves as the sort of open banking, but for the energy sector. So leading companies like LaSalle use our technology to help understand their building's operational footprint and just using an address. Other companies such as NatWest, Compare the Market, and National Grid use our services for a number of use cases, things like comparing energy tariffs, switching suppliers, demand flexibility, but last but not least, things like helping understand a building's energy and carbon footprint from a meter perspective, and then making recommendations on low carbon technology like solar or air source heat pumps for that specific building.
Okay, great. So let's get started. And to start, I think it's important to understand what sustainability means in various contexts and how it applies to different sectors. Now, sustainability is a broad concept that can encompass environmental, economic, and social dimensions, but its interpretation can vary depending on its focus. So in this topic now, we'll hear from our panelists about how they define sustainability within their specific fields and how it aligns with various frameworks and practices. In fact, Jada, I was going to go to you, Tariq, but I think we should probably start with you, given the involvement of biodiversity, especially in the planning and design phases. So, like in your opinion, how would you define sustainability in the context of biodiversity, and how does it align with frameworks like the UK Biodiversity Net Gain or TNFD?
Yeah, great question. It's a really interesting and probably ever-evolving answer, because nature has only really started to be included in sort of the ESG or sustainability reporting in the last few years. So we're still, as countries, but also as the world, thinking about nature in the context of reporting, it was still very early days. So to me, sustainability looks like considering nature early in the property's life cycle and taking action to minimize negative impacts and conserve nature wherever possible. That has win-win benefits on nature and companies, one from a risk perspective, but also for optimizing costs when it comes to considering biodiversity early in the life cycle. So I think that's a big part of it. And, as you mentioned, I think in the design and planning, there's this huge potential to save time and money by bringing biodiversity early into the discussion. I think also noting that most of us are familiar with net zero and what that means, but when we think about biodiversity, it's much more complex when it comes to quantifying impact, and so it therefore can't be quantified in the same way as carbon emissions. And so to strive for nature positive, which is sort of the equivalent term, there's a lot more components to it when it comes to regenerating nature, as well as preserving the diversity of species in which the asset is based, as well as your supply chain as well. So there's lots of different touch points. And the good thing about things like UK's Biodiversity Net Gain and the Task Force for Nature-led Financial Disclosures is that they provide a framework for different metrics that you can start tracking, as well as a framework for you to start, bringing stakeholders from all different aspects of the business into the discussion about how biodiversity should be considered. And so the Biodiversity Net Gain legislation in the UK has some really tangible steps, and whilst it is mandatory, it's very much something that can be benefited from in terms of adopting across all different areas of the business, not just sustainability managers.
Thanks, Jada. Tariq, I'll now move across to you. So, assuming the building is now being built, it's now being constructed, in your view, what would you say are the essential components of sustainability for real estate and building performance?
Oh yeah, that's a very, very long discussion. I'll keep it short and try to do it in 2 hours. I mean, that's a very long discussion, as you all know. First and standard approach is actually stick to existing frameworks, right? This is what the industry normally does when they are confused about what's the right definition. They stick to frameworks, and we have a lot of those, right? There's a lot of sustainability frameworks for the built environment for real estate projects such as LEED or BREEAM or DGNB from Germany and so on. There's a lot of frameworks, a lot of standards that you can stick to. But what we've experienced in our daily practice is actually that every client, every company has their own kind of self-made definition. And it's always about trade-offs. It's always about the trade-off between CapEx and outcome. To what extent can we actually take care of sustainability? At what cost? And this is actually what the industry is most concerned about from our experience. So we're always talking about trade-offs between what can be achieved and what kind of budget is available. And that's actually something that we have been dealing quite a lot with. And we were very active finding approaches how to offer a customizable framework for companies to define their own KPI sets, basically. What are they actually interested in? Because we think it's not making sense for the industry to just stick to one specific framework and then don't actually have the means to complete it, or only be able to complete it for certain lighthouse projects, where they basically present themselves as the green company. We are tackling the approach, or we are following an approach where we say, okay, first define what you're actually able to do, what are your minimum standards that you want to achieve, and then basically go for it on a larger scale. So rather than focusing on singular buildings and creating lighthouse projects out of those, focus on your daily practice on a broader scale. Especially if you were mentioning new building, new construction. I mean, the major issue in the industry is actually existing buildings. So when it comes to existing buildings, we follow the same approach. First, define what you have to achieve on a minimum level for your entire portfolio, and then try to find out which are the most cost-effective measures to achieve those goals. So to make it short, rather than sticking to official frameworks, we basically follow the approach of customizing those frameworks or those goals to meet the needs of the company in order to make it realistic.
No, thank you very much, Tariq. And continuing on this point, Katie, I assume Tariq might have covered some of the points you were going to mention, but how would you say that sustainability can be effectively integrated into building performance and management practices?
Yeah, I think when you're considering measuring ESG, particularly in real estate operations and management, to Tariq's point, there are endless amounts of KPIs, areas of focus. And that really stems from the fact that every single building and the setup of each building is completely different. You've also got the context that, particularly in the UK and Europe, we've got some of the oldest buildings in the world. So there's a lot of complications, there's a lot of unique elements that we need to be looking around. But I think, we, as an industry, we can see lots of KPIs in use. We see it all the time. They do vary. I think the need for some standard baselines for your building and portfolios, as Tariq has mentioned, is critical, and there will be some. But equally, I think when it comes to managing properties and facilities, it's actually really critical to the teams on the ground to have very clear ESG KPIs, and those standard ones will come out of operational efficiency typically, but also that progressive sustainability performance play. But I think what's critical to consider ahead of having these sort of nice KPIs is actually getting to the crux of identifying the most materially relevant ESG goals that align with the needs and the priorities of everybody who influences that building. And I think, typically you need to have that overarching umbrella view before you can start to have the ESG KPIs and the metrics that will support you in the momentum around those steps of getting to those big, bold goals. So I think if I just plug that into sort of tangible examples, I guess if we look at the environmental KPIs, I think it's very commonplace that we'll be looking at energy consumption, carbon emissions, water usage. So if you're looking at a building, for example, that is looking to reduce its carbon footprint, it's likely that you'll be focusing on carbon intensity, but also allocation to renewables, for example. But actually, the specific KPIs to monitor those areas of focus will actually vary hugely depending on the goals, whether that be you're leading with achieving net zero, you're leading on improving energy efficiency, or whether you're actually wanting to really hone in on enhancing water conservation as a part of that. So I think it's important to really have that visibility of the full picture as well as the granularity of those KPIs to move you forward. Not wanting to give all the time to the E, it does span into the S and the G as well. So if you look at social, again, the focus really is to look at tenant satisfaction, ensuring health and safety, typically from an operational management perspective. But actually, depending on the type of building, what that looks like is completely different. From a residential perspective, you'll be prioritizing tenant comfort, you'll be looking at amenities, whereas if you look at a commercial building, your focus will probably be very much on employee well-being and safety. And the same plugs into governance, you know, regulatory elements, as Tariq has said, there are endless amounts of them in the ESG space as well as in real estate more broadly, but actually the specifics will vary hugely. So whether you're looking at a high-rise office building or whether you're looking at a mixed-use development. So I think from my perspective, the really clear part, and there isn't a quick win on this, I'm afraid, but is understanding the most relevant ESG goals for your specific property and ensuring that you plug in the KPIs that can monitor and support you in that journey to achieving those big objectives, but making sure that you're constantly reviewing those ESG KPIs because they will change over time as you move. They're not static.
Yeah, well, Katie, like continuing on with this point, taking a look at them and them long-term goals, how would you say that real estate professionals can balance short-term operational needs with achieving their long-term goals?
Ooh, that's a long question as well.
Okay.
So I think, you know, as I've sort of nodded to, I guess, in what I said before, it's around having those very clear priorities up front. You need to be managing various elements in parallel. So I think focusing on those immediate needs like fixing maintenance and improving energy efficiency, those are really big opportunities from the operational management side of things, but also not losing track of setting those big sustainability goals that achieve things like zero emissions, carbon neutrality, whichever elements you want to learn. So really making sure that those two elements integrate is really, really important. I think on the back of that, you then need to be leveraging data, which I know we'll talk about later, but I think you need to be using that real-time data to address those current issues that I've talked about, those quick wins, those decisions that you can affect almost immediately, but also ensure that you're tracking towards those longer-term data collection processes to allow those bigger ticket insights and improvements that require big investment and really sort of shift real estate forward. And then in parallel to that, you want to be thinking smartly about your investments. So again, balancing that short long-term piece. So looking at cost-effective measures like energy efficient lighting. I know lots of people talk about it, but it's a really good way of introducing some early wins whilst also mapping out those bigger, larger investments like renewable energy systems or facade replacements. Those are really big investments and they take time, but you also need to know when the right point in your journey is to undertake those, and those will also be implicated by lease renewals and void periods and things like this. And I think for me, the last sort of biggest piece to help on that journey is around engaging, educating, communicating. It's one thing we all talk about a lot. I don't think anyone's got it right yet. But, you know, to a panel I heard from JLL in the summer, sustainability needs to reach everyone from the boiler room to the boardroom. That is really applicable. And that's what we always need to be thinking about, how we can educate, ensure everybody understands how it sits in their role, what their impact is, but also keep communicating the positives and the opportunities and the benefits that come from it.
Thank you, Katie. And finally, Ed, what would you say are the core elements of sustainability when it comes to carbon and energy reporting?
Yeah, great question. So for me, I think it's about, you know, getting all the ducks aligned, right? So starting with emissions inventory, right? So for a lot of clients, and they might be established in this journey already, but if it's their first time of looking at their carbon and energy from a reporting perspective, it's getting all scopes 1, 2, and 3 in their report. So that means direct, indirect. So in our world, you know, scopes 1 and 2 would be buildings that they control or operate. So understanding the gas that's used for the boilers, the electricity is used for, you know, running the day-to-day activities of the building, but also that indirect emissions. So if they lease buildings, you know, the assets that they lease, they need to understand what their tenants are doing in terms of energy and carbon. So getting that understanding, getting that in a report is obviously your first point. And then the energy consumption perspective is actually understanding what energy is used in the buildings and what associated carbon that has. So, you know, understanding why buildings are using certain energy. As we talked about before, every building's different, particularly every industry is different. You know, manufacturers will be using gas for furnaces, for example, whereas data centers, we know, are quite energy intensive. They tend to be highly reliable on renewables like solar, etc. And getting them into your reports and getting a wider understanding of the energy consumption is obviously important. And then a final, second to final piece really on this is the reduction strategy. So once you have that baseline, is understanding how the business is going to reach its North Star or its net zero goals. Things like, you know, low carbon technologies, as I mentioned before, air source heat pumps or solars, or like Katie mentioned before, even of a low low barrier entry technology like lighting, and you know, explain that with internal and external stakeholders that this is the strategy you're going to take to achieve your ultimate end goals. And then last but not least is just transparency, you know, and compliance on this. So ensuring that you're consistent, that the report is as honest as it can be to build trust with, again, shareholders, internal stakeholders, and customers alike. And be honest, I mean, the GHG protocol always, you know, encourages transparency when it comes to data gaps. If you don't have the data today on certain buildings because of a myriad of barriers, that's absolutely fine as long as you're transparent about that in the report and you have a plan in place to try and obtain better data going forward. And then last but not least is on the transparency and compliance pieces, just adhering to, you know, standards that everyone's aware of and the best practices, you know, things like the GHG protocol, ISACO, etc. There's no point in going off doing your own sort of reporting framework when there's industry standards out there, and you want to compare to your peers and people understand that, you know, certain frameworks have certain benefits. So yeah, it's worth looking into what you want to adhere to on that one as well.
Thank you very much, Ed. So having established a foundation for what sustainability means across different sectors, let's now turn our attention to the technologies that are driving these sustainability efforts. Technology is starting to play a very important role in enabling more efficient, transparent, and impactful sustainability practices. From AI to digital twins, these tools are changing the way we approach and manage sustainability. So, Jada, jumping back to you, what would you say are the key challenges currently within integrating biodiversity data into existing systems, and how would you say technologies like AI, but not limited to, can address these problems?
It's a great question, and I think the challenges probably are embedded more in the processes, less than the technology. So when it comes to biodiversity data, the first question, you know, we typically get asked are, well, where do we actually start? What kinds of data points would we actually need in order to effectively, one, understand biodiversity, but also two, start making decisions from it? And so, you know, what we do at Xylo Systems is do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. So we aggregate all of those data systems and present them in a way that is intuitive for you to understand, but also to then bring into your decision-making process. But I think it's really important to prioritize, because, and this is, you know, is sort of the beauty of AI and technology today, there are so many different ways to slice and dice data depending on what you want from it and depending on the goals that you're setting. And so I think it becomes really important to distill down from the complexity of biodiversity and all the different things that you can measure, the couple of things that you can start with that are really meaningful to the types of economic activities that you're doing. So whether you're the developer or you're the asset manager or anything else in between, really focusing on what kinds of data points are important to you, and you can actually really start to meaningfully track and build into your decision making as well. So I think prioritization is the big thing. When it comes to integrating that into existing systems, I think it's also really helpful to think about how data points in biodiversity can correlate or be parallel or benefiting from carbon as well, because they very much are interlinked, and progress in one is progress in another as well. So I think really sort of starting to link it with existing processes and how you currently manage carbon and energy data is a really meaningful way to do that sooner rather than later, instead of sort of starting from scratch with biodiversity. It can very much be, you know, built into existing systems.
Okay, thank you very much, Jada. Tariq, moving across to you, continuing this point around data. What would you say are the advantages and limitations of using digital twins for sustainability, especially when direct consumption data is unavailable or limited?
Yeah, I mean, there's a broad definition of what a digital twin actually is. in most companies, the digital twin currently is a set of Excel files where building data is being taken care of. In our definition, a digital twin is a 3D representation of a building where you can attach data. And for us, this is like the starting point for this entire journey. We've been discussing about sustainability and the different definitions of sustainability and what are possible KPI sets and what's the focus of companies and so on. People tend to oversee or to miss the point that all the beautiful AI-driven analysis that we have available today all start with data availability. And I feel like the industry has a kind of a hope that they can kind of leapfrog the data collection part. But in my opinion, this is just not possible. So in many cases, we notice, related to your question, we notice that in such a huge amount of properties, there's not even consumption data available. Although this is so simple to track, you know, it's like one of the easiest tasks in real estate management to gather consumption data for oil, for gas, whatever. And still, this is not available. So our approach is, okay, let's just offer that digital twin as a source of truth where you can attach not only consumption data once it becomes available, but also building element data. Because once you have building data available, you can actually simulate the consumption. So even without consumption data being available, you can start moving into a decarbonization pathway based on simulated data. So that's the approach of using simulations, you know, using whole building simulations for getting insights into the performance of a building without even having consumption data. Once consumption data is available, of course, you can improve the quality of your digital twin. This is also what Katie is doing with REsustain. So gathering data is the major challenge, and a digital twin can only be as good as the data that is being fed into it. So, yeah.
And Katie, moving across to you, continuing on Tariq's points, how does automation and digital twins influence the management and optimization of real estate for achieving these sustainability goals?
Yeah, so I think, you know, sort of Tariq has provided an awesome response in terms of, you know, a big part of this value will be driven around data and the right data and relevant data. As an industry, I think there's always an inclination that the most data you have is a winning scenario, and that's awesome. That's usually not the case. But I think in terms of looking at automation digital twins, I think for me, they will be absolute game changers for real estate management and operations in terms of pursuing the sustainability play, but also reducing emissions on the macro scale that we need to. I would say we're fairly new into that journey, but I think digital twins have evolved rapidly over the last 5 to 10 years as well. So, you know, Tariq's provided a definition already, which is awesome. And I think, you know, the big element that we really lean into is this bi-directional flow of information between that physical asset and the digital asset, and being able to essentially model, run scenarios in the digital asset that can then influence the physical asset. So for us, that feedback loop and that being on a continuous real-time basis using the data that's available and something that can be enhanced over time is a really, really powerful tool for managing and optimizing buildings, particularly when you look at the key users of this, properties and facilities managers, who are already doing an incredible amount on a day-to-day basis. And this is a massive enabler of them being more efficient, more impactful, and getting, you know, further excited on what they're doing and getting into the detail of sustainability. But I think, you know, there's a lot of focus in the work that we do around everyone's really eager to get to automation. That's where everyone wants to be, a bit like Tariq said, in terms of leapfrogging data collection. That automation has the same play as well, but actually, you know, before you can get into automating building systems, you've got to understand what's happening in the building as it stands today based on what's available to you. And digital twins are the best indicator of that in terms of the data you've got available, the gaps, and then you can have a strategy around how you fill those. But it still doesn't stop you from simulating real-time optimizations and how those can impact performance. So you can still progress on your journey. from sustainability perspective, whilst plugging those gaps, which I think is really important. I think once you've gathered the information, you've got that understanding of what's happening in your building today, you can then look at implementing the automation of the building controls. You know, and when I talk about that, I'm looking at things such as lighting, heating, cooling, and that's all relative to, you know, the usage of the building and making sure that you are effectively cutting down on wastage and energy consumption as quickly as possible relative to the environment. So, you know, I think when I look at these two elements together, it's not just about sustainability, it's also about lowering costs and maximizing ROI. And these two elements really do come together to make buildings smarter and more responsive, but they also lean into the fact of driving that efficiency piece, but also making sustainability more cost effective at scale and pace, which is incredibly important in terms of where we are against targets today.
Yeah, just a question to Tariq or Katie, whoever wants to answer. Are there any challenges or potentially opportunities you find when incorporating these technologies into existing real estate systems?
Oh, I've got plenty. So
Let's have a few hours on the list.
Katie, can I start?
Yeah.
All right. What resonated pretty much with me was what Jada was saying, which is it's not that much about technology, but it's rather about processes. That's what we're noticing quite a lot. As the topic is such a broad one, I mean, when it comes to building operations, there are so many things that are non-sustainability related, like stuff like maintenance that goes pretty much together with sustainability measures. But they are normally dealt with in totally different departments. You know, to give you an example, I mean, if I know I have to touch the roof in a couple of years anyways because it's just broken, why not consider an insulation measure at the same time? But I need to find out whether this fits my sustainability roadmap. So I need to have a target, a clear target in mind before I can assess whether a specific measure makes sense or not, you know. So the industry is missing this target variant or this target for their specific buildings. And that's where the digital twin obviously can help a lot, but it requires gathering data. And this is where the process thing comes in. And this is what I would definitely see as the major challenge in the industry, that too many departments have their own little worlds of data collection tools and Excel files mainly. So bringing all that together is like the major challenge because people like to stick to what they know. It's always hard to change a system that is kind of running and people look at those buildings, all right, they are still standing, it kind of works. And that's like this psychological issue that we have in the industry. Bringing data together is obviously making a lot of sense, but the process of getting there involves quite a lot of people, quite a lot of departments in order to make it right. Katie, but you can add a lot, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would echo all of that. I think, you know, the data silos is still a really big challenge. And, you know, you've got lots of fragmented systems, as Tariq has mentioned, that are working independently of each other. They've been like that probably for 50 to 60 years. So you're also trying to look at those systems in the context of new systems. None of them really want to talk to each other. And then you've got the lack of standardization of data formats and protocols. So there's a lot going on, everything from Excel files to VMS systems to IoT. You've got a lot coming together and we're adding layers to that. So I think sort of that remains the biggest challenge. But I think equally on the flip side, when we look to digital twins, it's actually a sort of stepped process in terms of being able to provide that holistic operational insight. You won't be able to do everything tomorrow in terms of centralizing, formatting that data, but it is a massive game changer in terms of getting that single comprehensive view of what's going on in your building and also allowing you to select relevant data. So you'll be able to use it as a pathway to bring in data points that are going to keep you on your journey. And I think one of the powerful things out of it from the work that we do is actually starting to centralize some of that operational data allows us to really identify really key inefficiencies that in theory should be quite obvious, but they're not, and allow us to make impact quite quickly. So it allows the quick wins that also allow the change in mindsets and people start to think about this stuff a bit more. So that's sort of, I guess, the perspective that we're on. I think there are lots of challenges, and it's difficult to keep chomping through those, but I think there's opportunities that come through the technologies such as twins to make that easier, but also make it tangible. I think sometimes data isn't very tangible, so it's hard for everybody to prioritize it. It's really easy, whereas to Tariq's point, you look at a building, it's there, it's fine, so why are we worried about it? And I think we need to bring some tangibility to it, which is what the twin can do really well.
Thank you very much, Tariq and Katie. Continuing on the topic of this operational data, Ed, I'll move across to you. You've mentioned about how you connect to every gas and electric meter. Now, how would you say that this really contributes to a more effective carbon and energy reporting?
Yeah, good question. I mean, to Tariq's and Katie's point before, energy consumption is one of the blockers for a lot of clients, and we are focused on the UK market, so we're not in Europe yet, Tariq, sorry, but hopefully one day we'll get there. But yeah, in terms of actually, collecting the gas and electricity, energy consumption and carbon data, historically it's been a challenge, right? Because you need to either, I mean, first of all, let's just point out that the pain is you'd have to go to every site, every asset that the owner has, and ask whoever pays the bills to collect that utility bill, and then someone manually calculates it, right? That's how they've historically done it, typically, or they estimate, and that's obviously prone to human error, and it's obviously a very time resource. My experience of working with lots of clients, asking them to go to every facility manager and ask them to provide a bill for the last 12 months is never a great way to start a sustainability journey, right? So what we've done is we managed to connect every gas, and electricity meter, and this provides obviously accurate carbon emissions and energy consumption, both from a location-based and a market-based. And what I mean by that is, if you know where the meter is located, then obviously you can use the national grid emission factors. But if you locate a meter and you have the meter details, you also know who the supplier is, right? You know if it's an Eon or a British Gas, for example. And you'll know that the mix of their fuel type for the year. And so you can apply very easily a market-based emission factor for that client as well. So it becomes very much more accurate. If a client is paying for renewable energy, they want to reflect that in their reports. So having access to the meter data, obviously, is very valuable in that point. But also what's really cool about it, and very important, is once you allocate a meter and get the meter details and you are continuously getting the data from the meter, you can look at constantly tracking the consumption of that meter in that building, and that helps with not just precise measurements going forward, but also when you implement these low carbon recommendation solutions, such as, like I said before, solar panels or heat pumps, you can actually see the carbon emissions from the building pre-installation and then post as well. So it helps validate the carbon savings of certain technologies as well.
Great. Thank you very much for all your comments there. Now, implementing technology for sustainability it never comes without its unique hurdles and challenges. While advanced technologies offer huge potential, they come with a range of challenges that organizations must navigate, which can be challenging. And these challenges vary from technical difficulties and data integration issues to organizational resistance and the complexity of defining sustainability goals. One of the major challenges is identifying the right start point for integration of new technologies into existing systems. And many organizations struggle to understand where to begin and how to prioritize their sustainability initiatives. Additionally, managing data sensitivity and integrating diverse data sources are crucial for accurate sustainability reporting. So in this section, we'll try and address some of these challenges and explore some of the strategies for overcoming them. And we'll hear from our panelists about the practical difficulties organizations face and the approaches that they recommend for streamlining the implementation. So Jada, moving back to you, what would you say are the common pitfalls organizations face when defining and achieving sustainability goals, particularly related to biodiversity?
Yeah, it's such an important question, and it's one that's really important to, again, I mentioned this before, but start thinking about sooner rather than later, before you have to, I think is always a good idea. I think the first thing when it comes to nature and biodiversity is, it's really hard to set goals if you don't understand what you're actually setting goals for. So there is a piece of, spending time actually really understanding what does it mean when we talk about nature? What is biodiversity and what are the components of that? It's a really simple question, but I think it's really worth coming back to that because it means that you're then empowered to understand the capacity that your organization has to enact real change and really make a difference from a process point of view in your organization. So I think that's the first step. I wouldn't call it a challenge necessarily, but it's definitely an important step. The next is then thinking about multiple scales of biodiversity. So the two main scales that we look at biodiversity are at the ecosystem level and the species level. And so it's important to consider both of these when you're thinking about change, particularly when you're looking at setting goals, both at an asset level, but also at a portfolio level. Looking at these two scales is really important to make sure that you're addressing any risks and opportunities that you have to quantify biodiversity and, again, build it into your decision-making process. The final bit then is really building in the process for data collection and aggregation. I think we've already touched on this a lot in the discussion, but it's a big piece of it. It's really hard to track or set a goal if you don't collect data to track your progress towards it. So it really is important to understand, where are we going to get this data to actually start tracking goals? And again, this is something that we do at Xylo Systems, but also what does it look like when we achieve this goal? What does it look like to build this into process that means that we can empower stakeholders to track these goals, no matter where you are in the world, particularly if you're an international organization. Having that standardized across all your regions is a really important piece to consider as well. So there's a lot there, but I think the first piece is the awareness of what is biodiversity and what are the big pieces that we can track. Because again, you could have 100 targets, but it's much better to choose 2 or 3 and really focus on how to optimize those.
Thank you very much, Jada. You ended then on this issue of data collection. So Tariq, I know you've got some comments on this. So how would you say that the industry can address these difficulties in data collection to support better sustainability practices?
Yeah, well, it's pretty much related to what Jada said. You have to define clear goals, and those goals cannot be just from one department. So in my opinion, the first and most important step is to get rid of silos. And what that means is basically, sustainability and digitization or data management or building information modeling, if you want to refer to the built environment, they cannot be separated anymore. Until now, they've been working in silos. And if I would have to set up this kind of sustainability data management department, I would put it into one department because they are so closely interrelated. I mean, what's the sustainability team supposed to do without data? Doesn't make sense at all. So getting rid of those silos is so important. The other important or the other issue I would like to mention is in terms of strategy. Just get started. That's the strategy I would suggest. But while you do that, keep track of data ownership. So getting started is like, you never know whether you have the perfect solution which will last forever, which will be the right solution for the next decade of building operations. How can you be sure? There's no way. So just get started, but make sure that data ownership is in your own hands. So you're not giving away your own data. That's a very crucial point. Let me specify this a little bit. The industry is pretty much used to receiving PDF reports. A PDF report is static and it's based on some input data, obviously. You need to keep hold of all that input data. Otherwise you're stuck. Otherwise you have this lock-in effect, which you have to avoid because otherwise you're inflexible and you're stuck with one specific provider. So to summarize this, silos is the first very important thing to think about. Which departments do you have to bring together in order to achieve your overall goals, not only one specific sustainability goal, and at the same time, take care of data ownership.
Thanks, Tariq. Sometimes I think we need to actually take a step back and think, why hasn't this happened already? And as we're all aware, there's this huge resistance to change within the industry. The industry is very conservative in the way it operates, and it just lacks in digitization and, you know, embracing these new technologies. So Katie, how do you think that organizations can manage this resistance to adopting new technologies?
Yeah, we don't like change, do we, as an industry? So, you know, I think managing resistance to new technologies, particularly in the realm of sustainability, where we've seen an absolute boom in terms of tech available, is naturally challenging. I think it's also important to recognize that not all of the technologies that are around have lived up to expectations as well, which means that fingers are burnt, and it won't necessarily be sustainability solutions that have burnt fingers. It could be tech and innovation around. And also we have to recognize that real estate is very risk averse, and it's savvy to the fact that, you know, 70% of startups fail within their first couple of years, which underscores that uncertainty and the risk involved. But actually, any business isn't going to get off the ground unless it starts from day zero. So I think there's also a need for organizations to come to the table with a very balanced view when it comes to technologies, really acknowledging the potential benefits as much as the risks. I think, you know, organizations, there's lots of resources, companies out there who can support real estate becoming upskilled around the technologies that are proven, that are reliable solutions, that are also a fit for their ESG goals. At times, I think people are selecting technologies and asking things of them that aren't what they were designed to do in the first place. So I think we also have to, as technology companies, get comfortable with saying no to things as well that compromise the integrity of what we do. Actually, you know, where we can really leverage specialisms between each other is really important. I don't think the prop tech world is as integrated as it could be, and I think there's a responsibility on us as well to come together as technologies, understand how we can integrate with each other, understand our own data points, and work together to essentially be seen as one solution, even if there's 10 solutions underneath that. And I think that would be a massive aid to the industry. I think if I think more about the sort of resistance side of things and think on the human side, because actually a lot of the resistance is human mentality, thinking, concern, risk. This is where I really sort of lean back into this education and informing people. It's amazing how being transparent at the very outset with everybody around why the tech's being chosen, what the potential impacts are, what the benefits are, the success stories, how it's being monitored, what the aspirations are, and to keep cycling that information back into the business is really critical. It shouldn't be done just at the onboarding phase. And I think alongside that, showcasing the quick wins, educating the business on how others can get involved, really sort of executing the herd mentality, but also seeing that as an opportunity to support the technology and continually innovating as well relative to real estate's requirements. And I think sort of the big thing that I see in my role that's parallel to REsustain actually is this piece around training. I think all too often the people who need to use the technology on a day-to-day basis aren't given the training, or they've given sort of one option at the very start. And I think, you know, it's really important that we keep people educated who need to use it, understand it, ensure they're comfortable, ensure they can ask all the questions they need to, and that they're evolving in line with that tech as well. So I'm certainly not saying that I've exhausted. There's a long list in terms of resistance, but, you know, I think these are some of the human elements which I think would be a really good base starting point to really get people on board with accepting the innovation and the amazing solutions that are on the market as well.
Yeah, I think one of the key issues as well that contributes to this resistance is how complex some of these solutions seem. When we've got an industry that lacks in digitization, some of these like AI solutions can be too complicated. Now, Ed, when we're taking a look at technology for sustainability, what would you say are some of the common challenges organizations face when starting their sustainability journey, and how can they identify the right start point?
Yeah, I think to Katie's point, I think the first challenge for a lot of organizations is just understanding where to start. There's a lot of prop tech out there, right? And it's on every business is different, every building is different, and so it's understanding like what's the right fit for them. But obviously, there's a myriad of benefits with this technology in improving accuracy of the data and helping understand the tracking of the sustainability journey. But one of the biggest challenges with that as well is getting, again, to Katie's point, getting buy-in. I really like that point before when Katie mentioned like from boiler room to boardroom. Everyone's got to be involved in this. When it comes to hitting these KPIs, these North Stars, it's going to be everyone involved. And so one of the challenges is actually communicating with stakeholders to get them on board. I notice now a lot of companies in their sort of KPIs from boardroom down have sustainability part of the metrics. So, you know, reducing not just energy consumption, but carbon footprint, waste, water, etc. And I think one of the, you know, the challenges with that is actually getting this information in layman terms to everyone involved. So one of the benefits with the new technologies now is like the analytics and the dashboards do help the people on the floor to understand why their energy or carbon footprint or waste has gone up this week, because they can see it in a real simplistic term in terms of maybe it's because the demand's gone up because it's peak season, and then they can start making real important decisions off the back of that. But just to sum it up, I think it's just that getting buy-in from everyone and getting an understanding of every business is different and every technology will have its own benefits depending on the business.
Thank you very much, Ed. Now moving on. So once organizations have collected vast amounts of data, the next critical step is turning this data into actionable insights that can derive meaningful sustainability decisions. Effective data utilization is key to making informed decisions that lead to significant improvements in sustainability practices. But the challenge lies in ensuring data collection methods are not only robust, but also aligned with decision-making processes. It's important for organizations to balance immediate needs with long-term sustainability goals, translating complex data into strategies that yield tangible results. So in this final section, we'll explore how organizations can leverage data for impactful decision-making. And we'll hear from our panelists on their experiences with data-driven sustainability strategies. And we'll also discuss methods for balancing short-term and long-term goals, as well as the role of simulation and automation in refining sustainability practices. So Jada, again, starting off with you, what would you say are the biggest challenges in translating biodiversity data into actionable decisions, and how would you say technology can help with this?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that we love to focus on because, you know, there's data for data's sake, and then there's data that can really be leveraged for impactful decision making. So I think, you know, not to sound like a broken record, but, you know, the first thing in order to make actionable decisions is to really understand the underlying data. I think that's a really big process, and I don't want to you know, undersell that piece of it. I think it's really important to really understand what you're quantifying, first of all, in order to be empowered in making decisions and really understanding the potential of those decisions as well. So I think that's the first piece, because particularly when it comes to biodiversity, you know, if you're have been focusing as a sustainability manager primarily on carbon emissions and energy, you might not be equipped with the tools needed to actually really understand what it looks like to make decisions that are supporting biodiversity. So I think that's firstly the really important bit, sort of either work with ecologists or consultants or a platform like ours to really get help on looking at what levers you have to pull in order to really make decisions that are, one, early enough in the piece where you have significant influence on, you know, the impact of biodiversity on that site, but also have the opportunity to bring in multiple stakeholders. And I think this has already been touched on a little bit, and, you know, between Katie and Ed as well, really making sure that there's multiple stakeholders in the room to make those decisions, because there is limited ability to enact true biodiversity change when it's just in the sustainability team. We've definitely seen the most success when the boardroom is involved in those decisions, and it's come from the top down as well. So I think that's really important. When it comes to using technology, I'm really excited, and this is something that we're working on in our technology, is scenario analysis and predictive analytics. And this is really exciting when it comes to understanding the potential of your decisions. So with scenario analysis, we can model what it looks like when you install a green roof, as an example. This is really exciting because it gives you, one, a little bit more confidence in making that decision and validating the investment that's required for that. But two, it also can expand the possibilities of what's actually available for you at different stages of the property's life cycle as well. So that's one really exciting example, and obviously AI plays a huge role in that. But that's just one of many examples. So technology will continue to make these decisions much more accessible to anyone, no matter your expertise in biodiversity.
And thanks, Jada. Continuing on this topic of simulation, but from a different perspective, Tariq, how would you say that simulation data can be effectively used to inform sustainability decisions and improve building performance?
Oh, there's a big ocean of results that you can produce using simulation. We've been talking a lot about the challenges of gathering data and all these things, which is like the heavy lifting part. But once that data is available, the journey actually starts. And this is where building simulations can actually offer so much in terms of insights into this and decision-making support, etc. Talking about different KPIs, different goals, we've been discussing that part already. But now, once the data is available, it can really help taking well-informed decisions and finding the most cost-effective ways of reaching your targets. And this is what simulations are all about. So whole building simulations have this potential to not only show the impact of certain measures in terms of energy consumption, but also in terms of OPEX, in terms of indoor comfort, daylight comfort, thermal comfort, air quality, all these things that are relevant to some, less relevant to others. As I mentioned, combining KPIs to what we call KPI sets is really creating strategies. And once that digital twin is in place, what we are basically doing in the Metabuild platform is we basically define what's actually possible for a certain property. I mean, if you have a monument protection situation, you might not want to put insulation measures on the facade, as a simple example. Or if you have a rooftop garden, you might not want to put a PV system on your roof. But once all these things are defined, do you have district heating available? Yes or no? Do you have an option for a ground source heat pump, or is there a subway in the way? All these things can be defined. But once these things are defined, we actually run hundreds and sometimes even thousands of scenarios for each given property. And we do cost analysis at the same time. So the CAPEX part is being taken care of. And what that actually produces is the perfect overview over your options and the cost effectiveness of certain measures. So what works in one project doesn't necessarily have to be the optimal scenario for another property. And as all these analyses can be or are actually site specific, it's really like to me, it's like the X-ray vision for building decisions. And that's what simulations can offer. So I'm getting a bit excited about this part because it's like the core of our technology, but this is actually what we do all the data collection and digital twin stuff for. So yeah, a lot of insights that you can create once you have that data available. So I hope that's a bit of a motivation.
Thanks, Tariq. It's a very interesting topic, and Katie, I'm sure you've got some comments on it. But Katie, what would you say are some notable examples where simulation results have driven efficiency and created meaningful changes in sustainability practices?
Yeah, so I think when you look to simulation, and I'm loving the excitement of this on the call, because I think, you know, the ability to simulate, I think, is a massive remover of a blocker. I know we've talked about those previously, but being able to simulate and understand impact, risk considerations before the actual implementation, I think will be a massive driver of confidence to the industry around accelerating decarbonisation. So I think it's really important to focus on that first. I think in terms of simulations, look, it's hugely varied. I think where the industry isn't around in terms of its journey is it's just getting into the detail of those simulations. And I think we're looking at a lot of the sort of earlier opportunities, whether that be introducing lighting, as I said earlier, perhaps new HVAC systems, perhaps even implementing a BMS where there isn't one at all in the building. You have the ability to understand, okay, what's the material impact this will have on my building as it stands today? what is the period over which I will realize the benefits? Now that can be an ROI in terms of investment. We know that the financial side is always a massive driver for the industry, but also seeing what the payback is in terms of the emissions reduction side of things and how that aligns with net zero's target. So your CRREM pathway in terms of how your trajectory will look over that piece. So I think there's lots of opportunities, there's lots of great examples, but I think, you know, you've got to have your data flowing first and then be able to work with that as a starting point and keep evolving that as well. I think when I look to simulations, I think it's also really important to remember that you want to be looking at those simulations of buildings in the optimized state. I think commonly we can look at the simulations in the building as it is, but you want to make sure that you've exhausted existing optimizations and you're building the simulations on top of that, because that will give you the accurate response of what the potential is for your building.
And finally, Ed, can you provide any examples where improved data has significantly influenced sustainability strategies or outcomes for an organisation?
Yeah, of course I can. I just want to say, first of all, Tariq, Kate, I love the enthusiasm there. Like simulation is really cool. I like that in terms of the next step of the journey from our world anyway. And Jada as well, just on the topic from you, I need to get a green garden in my house, I think. I mean, a green roof in my house. But yeah, sorry, going back to the question. In regards to technology helping improve sustainability reporting, yeah, a good example for us is we work with a huge a conservative well, it's a property conservative conservation company or charity, I should say. Everyone will know it's a big organization, but they had 5 estates. We did a trial with them in 2023, I think, and using our technology. I mean, I know plugging on my own tech here, but we looked at all the estates from a meter perspective, and we found some real disparities in regards to their actual total meters that they thought they had. So there was some more meters in some properties than they thought they had, and less in others. But what's really interesting about it is when you look at this sort of technology, and this is just our world, but there's obviously many other examples of this. It proved things like they thought that certain meters were oil rather than gas, and as you can imagine, oil burning meters emit a lot more emissions. So in their reporting, they were actually overestimating their carbon footprint rather than underestimating it based on the actual meter data. So things like this, I think, are really important, where the tech is actually helping improve sustainability reporting. But that's just our world. There's loads of examples of it. You know, like smart meters, sensors, all this good stuff is helping lots of clients out there to you know, get more accurate and precise data and for reporting purposes.
Thank you, Ed. And to everyone, I just want to ask one final question, and that is, if you could give one piece of advice to organisations looking to enhance their sustainability efforts, whether it's related to technology, data management, or integrating sustainability into their practices, what would that be? Jada, if you don't mind starting.
No problem. It's a difficult question. There's so many things. Yeah, I think I mean, we've kind of already touched on it, but definitely just start. I think there's, you know, it's never too late to start, you know, taking baby steps. And when it comes to biodiversity, really start with understanding your impacts and dependencies on nature, because that will help not only give you a starting point as to what are the key priorities that you can start quantifying, but also indicate to the business, you know, where you've got the biggest opportunity to reduce costs in your operations. And that's always the biggest win that I think can get a lot of people, you know, motivated to start reporting on these things as well. So definitely just start and realize that starting to report and take action on biodiversity can be a win-win for nature and biodiversity.
Thank you, Jada. Tariq?
Piece of advice, just give us a call if you want to get started on that journey. I mean, honestly, you need to create a strategy first. You need to understand why you actually want to go through all this data collection work, which is some heavy work, even though we're in the age of AI. You have to get some homework done before you can get all these recommendations, analytics, and so on. So it's like the foundation. We're in the building sector. You need to have a foundation before you can build a building. So you have to get started somewhere, and we're happy to help with that.
Thank you, Tariq. Katie?
Yeah, I love this question. So one piece of advice, I think for me, and I think it sort of captures as well what we've all been saying, is embedding sustainability into every aspect of your business. I think what we've heard today, it will feel different, it will be unfamiliar initially, but I think ESG will not be successful in the long term if we keep running it in a parallel work stream. So it really means that we have to embrace this data-driven decision making as a core practice. And I think that movement will allow us to engage advanced technology, the data management piece that we've talked about, to obviously track and report, but also deliver these forecasts, the simulation, the optimizations, the actual impactful actions that we need across the entire property lifecycle that we've all touched upon today. So yeah, I think to summarize, I think, you'll transform your approach to sustainability if you take it out of isolated initiatives and make it a fundamental part of your operational and strategic DNA. It's where we focus a lot on the management operational side of what we do. And I think you'll also ensure that your efforts are relevant, effective and lasting.
And thank you, last but not least, Ed.
Yeah, I think just to add to everyone else's point, I mean, for me, like Jada said, it's get started, give Tariq a call, Katie, totally, yeah, get buy-in. And then I think for me, it's just always like strive for better, right? So like, get started, but if you can, always aim for getting more granular data. The better data you've got, the better, analytics and simulations you can make, the more, accurate you'll become when it comes to making decision making. But yeah, always strive for better, I think.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you to our panelists for sharing your insights today. It's clear that while the journey towards sustainability is complicated, the integration of AI and other technologies offer us powerful tools to achieve our goals. As we move forward, the key will be in harnessing these technologies thoughtfully and strategically, ensuring that every step we take brings us closer to a more sustainable future. So as a takeaway to everyone listening and to our panelists, let's continue to innovate, collaborate, and then push the boundaries of what's possible in our efforts to create a world for generations to come. So thank you everyone for participating, and I look forward to chatting about this in the future.
Thank you, Aaliyah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leah.